Yeah, by the way, this is the Danish Netflix. We're sending live from location here in Copenhagen, an undisclosed location. Can't really tell you where it is. I'm not at liberty to say. Maybe in the future I will tell you where it is. If you don't know the series, well, look it up on Netflix. It's called Alien Worlds. Of course, in Danish they call it Livet på andre planeter, which is a very boring title. Basically says life on other planets. I've skipped the beginning because I want to get to the meat of the things, the matter, which are of course the alien creatures. And as you all have noticed, it's mostly fillers because, yeah, CGI animations, they're expensive and very time intensive to make. So it's natural that they only take up a few minutes of every episode. So but they do use their time very good. There was a section here that I've skipped on how they actually found out about exoplanets, so I started detecting them. So I can really recommend you watch the whole episode. That is a very good point, actually. Okay, I mean, I've seen the series, I've seen this episode before, but it's been a while. So yeah. But that is one of the things that stood out to me is that they mentioned, okay, now we've got a planet with twice the gravity of Earth, and that actually makes a huge difference just on how life evolves, how the atmosphere, the physics of the atmosphere alone, it becomes so that, and they'll go into details later on, but because the air is so much more compressed that it starts behaving like a liquid, so it's almost like you're swimming through the air. It's actually easier on a high gravity planet. So that is a very interesting concept. So let's see what they are going to do with it more. But the seeds are very interesting in any case. So what's in those seeds actually? They look like they're filled with gas or something. They're like little bubbles. So to get back to my original points, the high gravity planets actually has implications for the atmosphere, which becomes much more like a liquid, like it's an ocean. And I was wondering if these seeds were filled with gas or something to make them lighter. But let's see what they're saying. Okay, the thicker the atmosphere, then it actually becomes easier to fly, not harder. Which is, of course, the physics makes complete sense, but I never really considered that. Okay, good. This is a nice shot. Let's take a look at these creatures for a moment here. So what we've got here, it looks very much like a vertebratoid, maybe we should call it. It's I don't know if it has an internal skeleton, but it certainly does look like it does. And it has 3 pairs of limbs, which is fine. They're used as wings here. It definitely looks very much inspired on kind of a fish, or a shark even. It has these shark-like gills here. So, of course, what we're having here is a classical, what I like to call a Frankenstein fusion, which is actually not a critique. It's a kind of a technique to take parts from animals that we are familiar with and then put them together in odd ways, so you create an illusion of something that it looks alien, but still looks familiar, because it's a weird mix of things, but still it looks familiar, and it's actually a way to appeal to our imagination. So I'm not critical of the whole concept, but I'm just wondering if that is what we're going to find on other planets. So. Actually, I have not looked up if there's the science behind this series. Maybe I should do that for a full feature video sometime. But it would actually be interesting if they put a lot of work and thought into this, or if they just let the artists, conjure up something that looks plausible. But it's a very they're making some good points about the gills. Do they have gills or lungs? How would lungs work in a high pressure environment? I mean, would it be more like water, like a liquid? So they would actually, maybe gills would be a gill-like structure. What is even the difference between a gill and a lung, principally? I haven't actually thought about those matters, but I'm going to cue that thought. And someone wrote here, skeletons would crush under that pressure. Yeah, but they're not on land, they're floating through the air. which is an advantage, of course. So they would actually lessen the constraints on their weight, because if you put a whale on land, or maybe even at the bottom of the ocean, it would actually really start feeling the force of gravity. But a whale that is swimming through water, it has suspended gravity to some degree. So yeah, I don't think that is a big problem. But it's an interesting point nonetheless. How does the light get to the ground? I presume even on a high pressure atmosphere, the air is transparent. Could have done 4 limbs instead of 6. Do they have blood to reach all of those body parts? They must have some kind of liquid going around, yeah. But there's a lot of physics that haven't been considered with high pressure and high gravity planets, because that really changes the whole ball game. And I'm still sticking to my familiar Earth-like environments, but maybe sometime soon I'm going to do something about some things that are actually different from Earth. So let's see. Yeah. Good point. Yeah, lungs and imagination guilds on imagination. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, shall we? How hard would a heart have to work to pump blood under that gravity? It's the pressure that is an interesting question here. And I mean, okay, they may not be on land, and they may not be crushed by being crushed down onto the surface, but there's a lot of air pressuring, pushing in onto the animal. And if they get any kind of cavities, like lungs even, and blood, fluid cavities, they're all feeling the pressure from the outside. So yeah. Yeah, actually, what they remind me of? They remind me of plesiosaurs. They remind me of plesiosaurs very much, actually. You guys know what a plesiosaur is, right? These long-necked marine reptiles from the Mesozoic era, contemporaneous with dinosaurs. And yeah, they also do look like manta rays. But now that I see their fins, plesiosaurs are actually very interesting, and pliosaurs. They're very interesting creatures. Marine reptiles. They don't have a dorsal fin like ichthyosaurs and dolphins and sharks and fish in general, but they have these sideways big flippers. So they remind me most of those. So they look like small plesiosaurs. Yeah, by the way, this is also probably why maybe they're going to say that in a moment, but this is also the reason why they're releasing all the seeds at once, so they have a better chance of survival. And it's interesting that these creatures, they're flying instead of being on the ground and grazing. But being on the ground, they may actually be subject to gravity, because then they have to develop, these heavy legs that are twice as heavy as they would be on Earth. If you compare an elephant's legs with those of an antelope, you'll get an idea of what I mean. So imagine an antelope on that planet having the legs of an elephant. Proportionately. So yeah, so maybe that is also why they're flying and they're living off seeds. Just jump back for a moment. Yeah, so these actually look very interesting. Floating life, I've been wanting to do a video on that for ages, and to be honest, on a kind of a gas planet or even a gas giant, but one in the temperate zone, because if you imagine a planet like maybe Jupiter or Uranus, or which actually is an ice giant, but still one of those planets with a lot of gaseous atmosphere and a lot of hydrogen. In any case, if they were closer, if they were in the Goldilocks zone where it's temperate, then they would have a lot more water in their atmosphere. They would actually look bluish and with white clouds, and that would actually be a very interesting environment for life to evolve, but they would have to be floaty life. And Carl Sagan already did a design of balloon-like creatures in a Jupiter-like methane-dominated atmosphere. But and when I was a young man, like that was me 20-30 years ago, I actually made a lot of designs for life forms evolving, balloon-like life forms evolving in that kind of environment. So one of these days I'm going to do a video on life on gas planets. So look forward to that. But in any case, on a high gravity planet, you may have, there may be reasons they're opting here for a lot of balloon structures to overcome the high gravity, because that may be the only way to get up into the air. Let me check out the chat for a moment and then continue. Do they have bones? That looks like they have bones, yeah, but would be interesting to know what they're made of. How would they drink if they cannot land? Well, yeah, good question, but that's a very good question, actually. Drinking clouds? Yeah, it just takes a lot of time. You're going to have to eat a lot of clouds because lower density of the water in there. And but maybe on a high density planet, I don't know. The physics are so different. I'm going to have to really dig into that kind of physics. And physics is actually not my strong suit. My strong suit is evolution. So let's go. Let's continue. Yeah, there's not much to see here. It looks like they have a balloon, and then there's something hanging on beneath with 2 pairs of limbs. So oh, that looks great. Oh, that's a nice close-up. Let me take a look at that. Yeah, you know what? That actually looks a bit like an oral cone. If you watch my latest video, which I presume you all did. And they have this circumoral structure of these teeth that are in a kind of a ring, more or less, around the mouth, and what looks like some sort of exoskeleton on around that, but it doesn't look like they're molting, because the mouth is more fleshy than that, so it looks more like a shell around fleshy parts. You know, if you remember from my video on the arthropod recipe, what the most important ingredient for the arthropod recipe is that they're kind of caught inside their mold, but there's also a lot of other creatures have evolved, also outer platings and some form of exoskeleton, but they're more loosely knit. They're not constricted by having to mold their way out of, you know, renewing the exoskeleton. So and it would be interesting to speculate on how these creatures would do it, especially when they have a balloon to take care of. So I don't think they would be molding a lot. So, and it actually doesn't look like that. But otherwise, they're a bit arthropod-like with their jointed legs there. So, and is that 2 pairs of eyes? Looks like it. You see that a lot in Subnautica, in other science fiction. It looks like it's a simple way to make something look alien yet familiar. Just give them 2 pairs of eyes, and which is, you know, reasonable enough. You might expect maybe somewhere life forms to have 2 pairs of eyes. We do have spiders which have a lot of different sets of eyes, but still it's a bit, I see it a bit too often for me to take it too seriously, because it seems like a simple trick. Oh yeah, it's let's give it something familiar but do it double so it looks weird after all. So, but it's not a criticism, just a fact. Just a quick look at the chat. Yeah, don't ask me too many. Yeah, lamprey. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, actually, lamprey also has a oral cone, to be honest. Although they use wings, but it might be actually hard on that planet to get off the ground. So I reckon these sky whales, or whatever they were called, they're actually they're permanently up in the air. I don't know how they. No, not permanently, because I think they also move around on the ground at some stage. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I wonder how easy that is. But falcons, they kind of, it's an interesting concept, you know. Falcons do this skydiving, and a lot of other birds do the same thing. You know, birds catching fish in the sea, they kind of they use the gravity to get momentum and speed, and especially on a high gravity planet, that would be very effective. So, but let's skip this filler, which I recommend you watch on Netflix.
From a greater height.
Oh. Nasty. Oh, look at that. Yeah, that is like a proboscis, almost like a parapulid worm. And there you got the 2 pairs of eyes, which is, you know, I said it was a kind of a trick. I would expect, well, you know, I would expect these eyes to be more in the front and larger even, because they're a bit too small. If it's like a falcon, then if it's comparable to a falcon, then they should also have their big eyes. And I'm not sure what the function is of these side eyes, but they might actually have a function to keep an eye on maybe their mates or other things. So because that's with spiders, they have these big eyes, or in any case hunting spiders, they have these one pair of big eyes on the front, and then they have a lot of eyes all over their prosoma. So, and that is kind of a compensation for not having a neck, because we as vertebrates, or land vertebrates in any case, we can turn our head around and we can look around. But spiders, they have a fused head. Their head is fused with the rest of their prosoma, the anterior part of their body. So they cannot just that easily turn their head around. So then it's advantageous to have eyes in the back of your head, basically. So yeah, so that could be a good explanation of that. And looks a bit like a wing. Yeah, and I wonder why they have this. I think it's just fanciful artistry, but or maybe they're using actually to either protect their proboscis or whatever. But it looks like a very soft, muscly proboscis. Okay, all right. Now we're gonna get a close look at the mouth of the sky whales. They're actually they have a three-lobe mouth with looks like tiny teeth. They're more like filter feeders in any case, so they're not really needing strong teeth just like whales. But otherwise, they look very much like a vertebrate, or even like a whale with those eyes. And what I thought looked like gills, I'm not really sure what it is. It's just maybe a fantasy structure without much thought in it. And this looks like some kind of sense organ also. So yeah, would be interesting to kind of see if there's any thought behind these creature designs, or if they just made something fanciful and interesting. But it would be interesting to, like I did with Subnautica, to think up some kind of anatomy. So just a quick look at the eyes aren't forward facing. That's right, Vicky T. I'm missing a lot of comments here. So yeah, they can only walk on the ground with their hatchlings. Right. Yeah, we're going to get to that in a moment. Yeah, you'll have a stroke reading this, right? They wouldn't need a lot of hydrogen to float. Dense atmosphere, right? Okay, good point. Yeah, I didn't do the math or the physics. It's not my strongest point, but maybe I'm going to team up with a physics or math person here. Right, let's continue. Oh, look at that mouth again. It's cute. It's a very dense atmosphere, so how would sound like? That's also a very interesting question. Because I've heard, at some stage I heard some recordings from Mars, like lightning on Mars, and that sounded really odd because of the really thin atmosphere. So another very interesting question would be, how would anything sound like in a high density atmosphere? So, but yeah, I don't think they've thought of that, but that's okay. I mean, I like the tails. They look like a Rhamphorhynchus or a pterodactyl kind of tail. Inspired, of course, by a lot of birds or any other creature that have a handicap. So there's a kind of a signal saying, well, look how well I'm doing despite this big handicap, despite this big clumsy tail, which is also by the really pretty. They're really showing that they have a lot of, they're good at survival. They're good at gathering food and resources to be able to sustain, first of all, to sustain such a elaborate structure, and second of all, that they're also able to survive with that elaborate structure, because you makes you easier to catch, and it's a bit clumsy. So yeah, the peacock comes into mind. Sexual dimorphism is the term, yeah, for making males and females look differently. I know someone wrote, I dislike this series, too few aliens. Yeah, well, that's kind of, I can understand why you cannot just stuff it with aliens, because it takes a lot of time to design them and to animate them even more. So it's just the way it is, you know. There's a limited amount of money for these kinds of things, unfortunately. Okay, well, that is interesting. So their body can actually sustain being pushed down onto the surface like that. So, but you will notice they don't have any legs sustaining them. So they're a bit like seals on the beach. And I wonder how the implications are. By the way, I love this kind of plant-like thingies. I love the color of those. Yellow and is that purple or violet? Oh goodness, yeah. You know those scenes from those turtles that are hatching from the eggs that are buried on the beach? And they have to crawl over the beach to the relative safety of the ocean. And there are a lot of predators waiting to eat them, like birds and even, I think, even crabs and things like that.
Developing and dissolving their prey.
Like a big old amoeba, but with a solid form. Well, that is interesting. Can I say just one thing? We've seen at least 3 kinds of animals, and they all have radically different body plans. You know, you got the sky grazers, which are a bit like a vertebrate-like, and you've got these I forgot what the name was. Those predators, which I don't know exactly what. Well, they look more like some sort of arthropodoids, with only 2 pairs of legs and a few fins and stuff like that. They look very different from the sky grazers. And now these creatures, they're completely different. I don't even know if they have any kind of symmetry. But it's an interesting concept to have some kind of macro amoeba. You would not be able to, if you take a normal amoeba and just blow it up, or even a slime mold. Especially in a high gravity world, they would be like flat like a pancake, because you need some kind of structure, internal structure. And they would need a cohesive and steady structure, so they would not be. So not a creature that can, not a shapeshifter, would be very hard to make a shapeshifter. It would also be a video idea that I was considering, but like for example in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, you have Odo, the changeling, the shapeshifter, and I've been thinking a lot, but how would you be able to have something that can take a very solid form and then change it? It's very hard to do, I think, but I'm going to consider that option some stage. Anyway, that's a long question here by John T. Levine. Do the biologically expensive structures provide any advantage in sexual selection if the goal is to reach the female first? Yes, that's a very good question. Very, very well observation. Yeah, very good observation. Because they were just chasing her like mallards chasing a female duck. And that doesn't look like she had a moment to check them out and say, well, I'll choose you. Very good point. Good question from Wobbly. Where does Odo hide his badge when he's something like tiny or flat? Yeah, very good question. I think there's a lot of issues with shapeshifters in Deep Space Nine. It's a very fascinating concept, but I find it really hard to imagine how it would work. But still, if you think of they're experimenting with nanobots that can assemble, so maybe something akin like tiny little cells that find each other. I don't know. It's a very interesting topic. So let's continue with this. So these little creatures, these little sky grazers, they're still small enough to crawl over the surface and onto a high ledge and then become airborne for the rest of their lives. My guess is that John T. Levine says, my guess is that there should have been a mating ritual. Yeah, you're completely right. That's a very good observation. The number of offspring, yeah, there's something like RK strategies. Good point also. You would maybe expect at least as many as a turtle lays even more. But then again, if it's the only way to procreate on that planet for that kind of body plan, you know, it's all evens out, basically. So at least for now. Uh-oh, disasters. Yeah, because it's a planet with a lot of gravity. It's closer to Jupiter than it is to Earth in that sense. What are we going to do? But let's just have a talk. Let's just have a discussion. I'm going to put the chat on here, and then yeah, we're going to have a talk about things. Like, maybe can I just do like this? Yeah. So ask me anything. You got it's like 3 minutes to midnight, so I'm gonna stop at midnight or maybe shortly after midnight. But yeah, just hit me with your questions. Yeah. Anyway, if you aren't totally banned, why don't you make your own movie with your own alien creatures? Well, I'm gonna do that. Yeah, I have a lot of creature designs. I don't have them with me, but maybe for the next live stream, I'm just going to present. Maybe when we hit 10,000, because by God, I'm being discovered by the algorithm. By the way, if you want to take a look at my studio here, boring kitty boring here. Look at that! Oh my goodness! I'm already at 9,400 subscribers, which is I never thought I would approach 10,000 so quickly, and it looks I got 1,000 subscribers just the past 28 days, which is awesome. So yeah. Okay, we've got a question here. Burp, 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 burp. So let's start at the bottom here. Yes, well, I'm a post-capitalist, Sebastian. Deal with it. Vicky T asks, how does the predator shown find the gas to inflate the balloons? I think they said that they use bacteria, some kind of bacteria to generate hydrogen. And Pixel, no, let's go. Where am I located? Well, at the moment I'm in Copenhagen. Yeah, I live in Denmark and I work in Denmark. And yeah, it was the audio. Maybe it was even the music even, yeah. So favorite Dominion Kingdom, phylum, court order, class and species. Well, okay. Domain, you mean? Yeah, I don't know. I like diversity. For a spec Evo project I'm working on, what do you think about the thought of flying babies which crawl into a woman and grow into a second stage of their lives? But you mean? I don't. But that's a bit too oddly specific for me to comment on. They do focus a lot. Just a general remark, because I did see the series more or less, but I skimmed it a bit. But just a general remark, they focus a lot on the physics, which is interesting, and they focus a lot on the ecology, which is interesting. But for me, my focus is on evolution and how things are related and how they evolve. How the evolutionary tree branches out. So that is my focus, and that's rarely a lot of these alien speculative zoology shows. They focus a lot on the ecological aspects, on how they would survive and on how would they compete and how would they mate and all of those things, and they also focus a lot on the physics, and which is fine, but I would like to see a show like, for instance, Bibluridian. He made a great alien biosphere series where he just goes through the evolution of things. He does talk a lot of ecology because he is an ecologist, but it really goes into depth of the body shapes and the body plans, how they would evolve, and how the evolutionary tree would fan out, which is interesting. And now it's down again.